Valentine's Day had always meant something to me. Not because I was some hopeless romantic, but because it was one of those rare moments when life slowed down enough to remind me why I worked so hard, for my wife, Jessica. The past few years had been routine. We had our ups and downs, like any couple, but I had never once doubted her loyalty. She had been my best friend, my partner, the woman I had built a life with. Lately, though, things had felt off. It was subtle at first, excuses about late nights at work, a shift in the way she spoke to me, like she was constantly irritated by my presence. I brushed it off, convinced myself that stress was getting the best of her. I had gone all out this year, determined to remind her of what we had. A reservation at her favorite restaurant, a gift that was more thoughtful than expensive, and a bottle of wine that had been collecting dust in our cabinet, saved for a special occasion. But the moment I told Jessica about my plans, her expression shifted. There was no excitement, no appreciation. Just hesitation. She fumbled for an excuse, something about a last-minute work obligation. My stomach tightened, but I forced a smile and told her I understood. Maybe I really had been blind. I refused to let disappointment ruin the night. Instead of sulking, I decided to bring the celebration home. I set the table, lit the candles, and uncorked the wine. I imagined how surprised she would be, how the warmth of the evening would melt away whatever distance had grown between us. And then the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone, but I answered without a second thought. Standing there, dressed sharply, holding a bouquet of roses and an expensive-looking gift bag, was a man I had never seen before. His face lit up the moment he saw me, but the smile was meant for someone else. I didn't say a word. I just stepped aside and let him see inside. The table set for two, the candlelight flickering, the wine waiting. The confusion on his face deepened, his grip on the bouquet tightening. Realization hit him before either of us spoke. And then, as if on cue, Jessica appeared from the hallway. Wearing lingerie. Everything slowed. The weight of the moment crashed over me like a tidal wave. The quiet hum of the evening, the soft crackle of the candles, the faint melody of the playlist I had queued up for our dinner, became deafening in its irony. Jessica's face drained of color. For a split second, I saw panic in her eyes. Then, like a seasoned liar, she composed herself. But it was too late. The perfect illusion was shattered. Jessica stood frozen, her body tense as her mind scrambled for a way out. She knew she was caught, but that didn't stop her from trying to control the situation. It was a reflex, the same way a drowning person thrashes against the inevitable pull of the water. The man at the door, Tyler, as I would later learn, was the first to react. He looked from me to her, then back again, his face twisting in horror as the truth unraveled before his eyes. His grip on the roses loosened, the bouquet slipping slightly in his grasp, as if the weight of his own naivety had suddenly become unbearable. He hadn't known. That much was obvious. The heartbreak in his eyes wasn't just for himself but for the betrayal he had unknowingly been a part of. He had come here expecting a night of romance, maybe even love. Instead, he had walked straight into the wreckage of my marriage. Jessica moved first, stepping forward, her voice already laced with excuses before she had even spoken. She tried to manipulate the moment, as she always did, twisting reality, making it seem as if we were the ones misunderstanding the situation. She painted herself as the victim, spinning her web of lies so quickly it would have been impressive if it weren't so disgusting. She stumbled over her words, reaching for anything that might lessen the damage. It was innocent. It was miscommunication. It was my fault for not understanding her needs. Tyler recoiled from her like she was venomous. The betrayal in his eyes burned brighter than mine because, unlike me, he had no reason to suspect her. She had fed him a story, a perfect, well-rehearsed narrative of a woman trapped in an unhappy marriage, a woman who had already moved on in her heart, waiting for the right moment to finalize things. Only now did he realize he had been nothing more than a tool in her deception. Jessica's mask cracked when she saw Tyler wasn't buying it. Then her eyes turned to me, searching for something: weakness, forgiveness, a chance to rewrite the truth before it solidified into something undeniable. But I wasn't giving her that. I just watched. She shifted on her feet, growing more desperate as the silence stretched. She had always relied on her ability to talk her way out of things, to spin reality into something more convenient. But there was no spinning this. Not with both of us standing there, seeing her for exactly what she was. Tyler finally spoke, his voice hollow, tinged with something between disgust and disappointment. Then, without another word, he turned and walked away, dropping the roses on the porch. The flowers scattered, petals separating from the stems as they hit the ground, a fitting metaphor for whatever illusion he had been living under. Jessica called after him, her voice climbing in pitch, but he didn't even slow down. She was left standing there, breathless, eyes darting back to me. And then it was just the two of us. The air between us was thick with the weight of her betrayal. The candlelight from the table flickered behind me, casting her shadow against the wall, long, distorted, monstrous. She swallowed hard, shifting tactics in an instant. Now, she softened her voice, made herself look smaller, more vulnerable. She tried to reach for me, to lace her fingers through mine like she had done 1,000 times before, as if that simple touch could erase everything that had just happened. I took a step back. Her expression darkened. She didn't like losing control. Her words changed again. Now, she was defensive. Angry. This doesn't change anything. You were never there for me. You stopped making me feel wanted. You drove me to this. The excuses were laughable. She had a way of rewriting history, making herself the wounded party even when she held the knife. But I wasn't biting. I let her talk. Let her spill every excuse, every manipulation, every desperate attempt to twist this into something she could walk away from without guilt. Then I turned my back on her. I walked past the table, past the dinner I had prepared, past the bottle of wine I had uncorked with the naive hope that tonight would be something meaningful. Jessica called after me, her voice climbing, the panic setting in. She wasn't panicked because she had hurt me, she was panicked because she realized she was losing control of the situation. I grabbed my coat and my car keys without a word. She demanded to know where I was going. She had lost the right to ask. As I opened the door, I glanced at the roses lying on the porch. Trampled. Ruined. Fitting. I stepped over them and walked out into the night, leaving her alone in the home we had built together, the home she had so easily desecrated. But this wasn't the end. Not even close. I drove without a destination, gripping the wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. The streetlights blurred past, streaks of yellow cutting through the darkness, but my mind wasn't on the road. It was trapped in that moment, the way Jessica had stood there, caught red-handed, and still tried to lie her way out of it. She had no remorse. No shame. Tyler had looked broken, betrayed. He had been just another victim of her deception, just like me. Maybe he would be able to move on, forget her, wipe his hands clean. But I didn't have that luxury. Jessica had been my wife. She had built a life with me, looked me in the eyes for years and told me she loved me, all while sneaking around behind my back. I finally pulled into an empty parking lot behind a rundown diner, turning off the engine. The silence pressed against me, thick and suffocating. I should have been furious. I should have wanted to scream, to break something. But the anger hadn't fully settled yet. Instead, all I felt was hollow. I sat there for what felt like hours, staring at the cracks in the asphalt, trying to piece together where it had all gone wrong. Had it been months? A year? Longer? Had I really been that blind? Then my phone buzzed. I already knew who it was before I looked. Jessica. The first call went ignored. So did the second. By the third, I finally picked up, not because I wanted to hear what she had to say, but because I wanted to see how far she would go to spin this in her favor. Her voice was soft at first, calculated. She played the remorseful wife, the woman who had made a mistake. She begged me to come home, saying we could talk, that things weren't as bad as they seemed. It was almost impressive how quickly she had rewritten the story in her head. When I didn't respond, her tone shifted. Now she was the wronged party. This was my fault, she claimed. I had been distant, neglectful. If only I had been a better husband, she wouldn't have needed to find comfort elsewhere. That was when the anger finally set in. I hung up without a word and turned off my phone. She had no idea that she wasn't just losing me, she was losing everything. By the time I pulled into my brother Ryan's driveway, the anger had settled into something colder. Something more dangerous. Ryan answered the door, bleary-eyed, clearly half asleep, but when he saw my face, he didn't ask any questions. He just stepped aside and let me in. I told him everything. He listened in silence, his expression growing darker with every word. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and exhaled sharply. So, what's the plan? That was why I had come here. Because Ryan knew me better than anyone. He knew I wouldn't just sit back and let Jessica walk away from this unscathed. I want to hit her where it hurts. My voice was steady, controlled. She's built this perfect little life for herself. I'm going to tear it apart. Ryan smirked, shaking his head. You always were the patient one. Patience had nothing to do with it. This was war. And I was going to make sure Jessica lost. Step 1, the money. Jessica had been bleeding our joint accounts for months, funneling money into her personal savings, probably thinking I wouldn't notice. She was smart about it, small withdrawals, subtle transfers. But she wasn't that smart. I had already contacted the bank before I got to Ryan's, freezing the accounts before she had a chance to move any more. The moment she tried to access them, she'd realize she had nothing left. Step 1, complete. Step 2, the truth comes out. Jessica had spent years crafting the perfect image, devoted wife, loyal partner, someone people admired. If there was one thing she cared about more than money, it was her reputation. So I destroyed it. I started with her friends. Sent them screenshots of her messages to Tyler, proof of her affair. Most of them had no idea, she had spun a different version of our marriage to everyone, playing the victim, making herself look like the innocent one. Then, I reached out to her family. Her sister was the first to respond. She was furious, not at me, but at Jessica. She had always suspected something, but now she had the proof. She promised me that their parents would hear about it, and that Jessica would have a lot of explaining to do. Step 2, complete. Step 3, the final blow. By morning, Jessica had left a dozen voicemails. Some were angry, some were desperate. But then came the last one. You bastard, she hissed, her voice shaking with barely contained rage. You think you can just destroy my life? You have no idea what you've started. That was the moment I knew I had won. Jessica wasn't remorseful. She wasn't heartbroken over losing me. She was furious because she had lost control. She had built her world on lies, and I had burned it to the ground. And I wasn't done yet. The aftermath begins. When I finally went home, I wasn't surprised to find Jessica waiting for me. She stood on the porch, arms crossed, eyes burning with fury. She didn't look broken. She looked ready for a fight. But so was I. I stepped past her without a word, unlocking the door, knowing full well that she no longer had any claim to this house. Her voice was sharp as she followed me inside, throwing accusations, insults, threats. She was unraveling, and it was glorious. Then, she made her biggest mistake. I'll take you for everything, she snapped. You think freezing the accounts changes anything? I'll fight you in court. I'll win. That was when I turned to face her, holding up the envelope I had been waiting to use. It was filled with documents, evidence of her infidelity, proof of her financial manipulation, a full breakdown of every secret transaction she had made. And at the very top, the divorce papers. Already signed. Jessica's face paled. For the first time, she looked afraid. "This is over," I said, my voice cold. "You've lost." She opened her mouth, but no words came out. I turned and walked away, leaving her standing there in the ruins of everything she had built. This wasn't just revenge. This was justice. And it was only the beginning. Jessica didn't leave right away. She stood there, gripping the divorce papers, her fingers trembling as she flipped through the pages. I could see her mind working, desperately searching for a way out. She had always been a master manipulator, skilled at twisting words and playing the victim. But this time, there was no one left to believe her. Her friends had abandoned her, her family had turned against her, and the man she had betrayed me for had walked away in disgust. She had nothing. And she knew it. I watched as the realization sank in, her body going rigid, her breathing uneven. Her pride wouldn't let her break down in front of me, but I saw it in her eyes, the fear, the regret, the crushing weight of consequences she never expected to face. She finally found her voice, but it was weak, hollow. "This isn't fair," she whispered. I almost laughed. Fair? Was it fair when she crept behind my back, using my money to fund her affair? Was it fair when she spent months lying to my face, making me feel like I was the problem? Jessica had spent our entire marriage believing she was untouchable. That no matter what she did, no matter how many lies she told, she could always talk her way out of it. Not this time. She tried to argue, but I didn't engage. I had already won. There was nothing left to say. Without another word, I turned and walked upstairs. She didn't follow. I heard the front door slam a few minutes later, her footsteps fading as she disappeared into the night. She would be back, I knew that much. She wasn't the type to go down without a fight. But I was ready. The next few days were chaos. Jessica made good on her threats, hiring an attorney and trying to challenge the divorce agreement. She wanted the house, she wanted half of everything, and she demanded alimony. Her argument? That I had emotionally neglected her. That she had been forced into her affair because I wasn't giving her what she needed. That she deserved to be compensated for all the years she wasted with me. It was almost comical. Except, she didn't realize that I had already outmaneuvered her. The bank accounts were frozen, the financial records were in my lawyer's hands, and thanks to the mountain of evidence I had gathered, her claims were as empty as the future she had planned for herself. The court didn't look kindly on cheaters who drained marital assets to fund their infidelity. By the time my lawyer was done with her, Jessica wasn't fighting for half, she was fighting to keep anything at all. I watched as she unraveled in the courtroom, her carefully crafted image cracking under the weight of her own mistakes. She cried, pleaded, tried to spin new lies, but it was useless. The judge saw right through her. By the end of it, the ruling was clear. Full ownership of the house. Mine. Our savings. Mostly mine. Alimony. Denied. The lawyer fees she had racked up trying to fight me. Hers to pay. And the final blow. She had to vacate the house immediately. Her face turned ghostly white when the decision was read. She had lost. Completely. I expected her to lash out, to scream, to throw some final desperate attempt at manipulation. Instead, she just sat there, stunned. Jessica had spent so long controlling people, bending them to her will. Now, for the first time, she was completely powerless. And it destroyed her. Jessica's downfall wasn't just legal. By the time the divorce was finalized, her entire social circle had abandoned her. The moment people saw her for who she really was, they wanted nothing to do with her. Her family was humiliated. Her friends, the ones she hadn't already lost, cut ties. Even her workplace became unbearable, word had spread, and whispers followed her everywhere. But the worst part for her. Tyler never came back. I heard through a mutual acquaintance that he had moved on, disgusted by what he had learned. Whatever fantasies Jessica had about running off into the sunset with him had shattered the moment he realized she was a liar. She had destroyed everything, her marriage, her reputation, her financial stability, and she had nothing to show for it. One evening, just as I was settling into my new, quiet life, she showed up at the house. She stood on the porch, eyes red-rimmed, looking smaller than I had ever seen her. For a second, I thought she might apologize. That maybe, after everything, she had finally accepted what she had done. Instead, she asked if she could come inside. Said we should talk. Said we could fix things. I didn't get angry. I didn't gloat. I didn't even smile. I just looked at her, really looked at her. And I felt nothing. Whatever love I had once had for her, whatever sadness I had carried after her betrayal, was gone. She wasn't my wife anymore. She was just a stranger. Without a word, I closed the door. She didn't knock again. I watched from the window as she stood there for a moment, as if waiting for me to change my mind. Then, finally, she turned and walked away. For the first time in a long time, I felt at peace. This war was over. And I had won. Jessica never came back after that night. I watched from the window as she stood on the sidewalk for a long moment, shoulders slumped, before finally walking away. She didn't turn around, didn't try again. She knew. Whatever power she had once held over me was gone. She had thrown everything she could, lies, manipulation, threats, and none of it had worked. I had beaten her. The silence in the house felt different now. Before, it had been heavy, filled with unanswered questions and quiet suspicions. Now, it was peaceful. For the first time in years, I could breathe. The first thing I did was clear out the house. Every trace of her, her clothes, her perfumes, the little decorative things she had filled the space with to make it hers, all of it was packed up and left by the curb. I repainted the walls, moved the furniture, rearranged the space until it felt like mine again. The bed we used to share. Gone. I bought a new one, a better one, one that hadn't been tainted by her betrayal. It was a strange feeling, rebuilding my home without her in it. But with every change, I felt lighter. As if I was stripping away not just the physical remnants of our marriage, but the weight of everything she had done. I even found myself sleeping better. No more waking up in the middle of the night, no more staring at the ceiling wondering if she was out with him, if she was lying to my face. That part of my life was over. And I had no intention of ever looking back. I didn't go looking for updates on Jessica. But life has a way of making sure you hear about things, even when you don't care to. She was struggling. Badly. After the divorce, she had nowhere to go. Her family wasn't offering her a place to stay, not after what she had done. Most of her so-called friends had distanced themselves the moment she lost everything. And financially? She was screwed. She had spent months secretly draining our accounts, thinking she was setting herself up for a new life. But now, with all of that gone and her legal fees drowning her, she was left with nothing. She tried to get Tyler back. That much, I heard from a mutual friend. It didn't go well. Tyler had already moved on, met someone else, a woman who wasn't a liar and a cheater. Jessica had shown up at his place one night, begging for another chance. He shut the door in her face. I almost felt bad for her. Almost. But then I remembered the way she had looked at me when she got caught. The way she had tried to rewrite the truth, to twist it so she wouldn't have to face the consequences of her actions. No, she had done this to herself. And I wasn't about to waste a second of my life feeling sorry for her. The first time I went out with another woman, it felt strange. Not because I missed Jessica, God, no. But because I had spent so much time wrapped up in the drama, the betrayal, the anger, that I had forgotten what it was like to just be with someone. Her name was Rachel. She was smart, funny, and nothing like Jessica. She didn't play games. She didn't make excuses. We met through a mutual friend. She knew about what had happened with my ex, everyone did, but she never treated me like a broken man. She treated me like me. It was refreshing. One night, as we sat on my newly rebuilt porch, sipping drinks and watching the sun go down, she turned to me and asked, "Do you ever think about her?" I thought about it for a moment. Jessica hadn't crossed my mind in weeks. "No," I said honestly. "Not anymore." Rachel smiled, leaned her head on my shoulder, and we sat there in silence, the kind that felt good. The kind that felt like peace. Months passed. I had moved on, truly moved on. Jessica was nothing more than a bad memory, a lesson learned. And then, one day, she reached out. An email. I almost deleted it without reading, but curiosity got the better of me. It was long, rambling, full of the same self-pitying nonsense she had tried to spin in court. She was struggling. She had lost her job. She was couch surfing, trying to piece her life together. She had changed, she swore. She was sorry. She missed me. And then, the real reason for the email, she wanted help. She wanted me to help her. It was almost funny. I didn't respond. Instead, I forwarded the email to Ryan with a simple message, "Guess who finally hit rock bottom?" His response came a few minutes later, "Don't you dare give her a damn thing." I had no intention of doing so. Jessica had made her choices. And now, she had to live with them. One night, I found myself standing on my front porch, looking out over the quiet neighborhood. The place I had once shared with Jessica felt entirely different now. It was mine, truly mine, and I had built something better out of the ruins she left behind. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't bitter. I was free. Jessica had spent years believing she was the center of my world, that no matter what she did, I would always be there, always waiting. She had been wrong. I went back inside, shutting the door behind me. The past was over. And my future had never looked brighter.